right, everyone, welcome back to another amazing episode with another amazing guest that we have today. Emmanuel Anthony is a human behavioral specialist, researcher, writer, consultant, teacher, DeMartini method facilitator, and inspirational speaker. He has spent the last decade working with thousands of clients globally, dedicated to assisting human beings one-on-one and one-on-many to get crystal clear on their mission on planet Earth. Overcome common mental disorders, accelerate human evolution, growth, and mastery within all 7 areas of life, whilst drastically expanding their awareness. So Emmanuel, wow, that is, first off, human evolution. I want to know all about this, but perfect. So there you go. And I appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me. And yeah, wherever it goes today, I'll be more than glad to enlighten you and the audience on that conversation.
Gosh, so there's so much I want to get to. And I want to kind of just attack right at the source of this because we had a conversation the first time before we did this, and I love the conversation that we're about to get into. So let's attack it. One of your main areas of expertise, you talked about kind of the areas of life that you specialize in, and you are a human behavioral specialist. And, I am also in the behavior change field. So you're a little bit more advanced than I am in that kind of methodology. You probably have a bit more of experience than I do, but so basically mental disorders, man. I mean, your thing is overcoming things like anxiety, things like stress, things like depression, which a lot of people have, specifically in the United States, but probably all over the world. I mean, these are common things now. So what's your take on it, number one? And then we'll kind of go from there.
Well, my take is that every human being has a mental disorder. It's what degree? Because mental disorders are just feedbacks. Every human being's experienced anxiety. Every human being's been depressed about something. Every human being has felt anxious about having or not having something occur in that. So, we've all felt bipolar at some point, extremely high, extremely low. It's all perception. So it's not a case of whether we experience those, it's the degree in which we experience it. That's when we usually start to seek assistance for it. So say, for example, myself, I'm an avid golfer. I love going out and playing. It's one of the most rewarding and stressful sports you can play. And on a weekend, I can go out and I could, be playing very well by myself. You put me in front of a couple of guys that are maybe 1 or 2 handicappers. I'm a 15 handicapper. And if you put me in front of guys that are really, really great golfers, you can find that I experience a little bit of fluctuations in my heart, not wanting to duff the ball in front of them or shank it. So we all experience these symptoms. They're part of the human experience. The real question becomes, what happens when these symptoms start to get to an extremity where it's taking over your life? Because if you just experience it temporarily for a short period of time, like prior to a golf shot, and then I never think about it again, that's fine. Most of us can deal with that. But when it starts to occupy time and space in your mind, psychologically and physiologically within your body, to the degree where it's having an impact on other areas of your life, and it's all you're thinking about, it's a constant thought within your head, and it's something you haven't been able to get a result in or achieve, that's usually when I step in. And that's usually when I'm of assistance to people.
Okay, well, first off, I think everyone wants, first, like 15 handicap. I'm like a 35 handicap on a bad course. So, that's pretty impressive. Hopefully one day I'll be 15. So that's pretty awesome. But I agree with you. That makes a lot of sense. And so yeah, obviously, I love what you said, that like everyone's going to feel, you can't live life without some stress. You can't live life without something, some anxiety. That's obvious. I think that's a given. It's where we take it to that extreme level. It's like, it's just this constant thing that we live with. So as a human behavior specialist, okay, so first off, what is that? So people know what you do, and then kind of we'll dive into kind of how we can kind of get rid of these, factors and stress, anxiety, and depression.
Well, when I first started 11 years ago, I wanted to understand what it was about human behavior that created certain symptomology, because I don't believe that any of these are what's wrong with a person. I actually just believe that they're feedback mechanisms, because the more that you study the universe, either through physics, which is the understanding of how the universe exists through mathematical algorithms, physiology, psychology, biology, but even if you're studying something completely out of these fields, like we were joking before about astronomy or something like that, we end up finding out that there's a mathematical algorithm that underlies each one of these ologies. And therefore, each one of these has order and organization within them. So we're not finding that it's random chaos, but the more you study your field, the more you start to find out how the field actually runs. And there's a hidden order behind all of that. So as I started to work with clients, what I discovered through one of my mentors, Dr. John Demartini, there was a hidden order. So whenever a person was feeling, say, anxious, it was because they were infatuated with something, and therefore they were resenting the opposite of it and creating polarities within their mind. The minute we balanced out the polarities, all of a sudden the anxiety dissipated and dissolved. So the anxiety wasn't what was wrong with them. The anxiety was an imbalanced perception that was creating feedback. And this continued to occur with depression, bipolar, and all of these symptomologies. And then clients of mine that had been seeing psychiatrists and psychologists, one lady, 7 psychiatrists in 7 years. And then we worked together, and in 6 weeks, we were able to overcome the thing that she'd been trying to overcome for 7 years with 7 different people. And as I started to see that happen, first in the tens, 20s, 30s, then hundreds, and today thousands, I started to understand, because as you start to work with hundreds and hundreds of people, you have test subjects. And when you apply the same methodology and it keeps working, now you have a scientific principle, because true science means it's replicatable. Whereas if it only happens a few times, it's an instance. And as I saw that starting to happen, from there, I started to realize a few things. Number one, I was getting a profound understanding of human behavior and how to actually apply certain methodologies in order to alter and change it in the way that people wanted. But secondly, I also started to realize that people needed to learn about that, because I could help them create change. But unless they discovered how to create change themselves, they could end up in the same spot again and end up in a repetitive cycle.
I love that. Here, give us 1 second. We're going to pause real quickly and we'll be right back. All right, we're back at it. So, okay, love what you said there about kind of getting involved, and basically everything's a system. And when you kind of, well, you didn't say system, but that's kind of the word that kind of came to my mind, was things that are systems, or I guess mathematical algorithm, logarithms, whatever it is in your body. And once you kind of find a way to almost reverse the formula, that's how you kind of get out of these systems that we create for ourselves. So I guess, so is it too much to say that something like anxiety is a system that we create in our own body versus it being something that is something we can't control? Because if it's a system, then we can control it. But if it's not a system, then it's something we have to deal with. Okay, so it is, you would consider it a system.
It really matters. If you're in a pharmaceutical world, you're going to say that, it's the egg and the chicken situation, that the anxiety is happening to you, and then that the pill is going to come help with that. But I come from a very different standpoint. But I know what I've seen in thousands of clients. So let's start off with the root cause of anxiety, because this will give you an indication as to where this comes from. So we have different parts of the brain, and depending on which part of the brain that we utilize, that'll determine the symptomology that we experience. The amygdala is a very prehistoric part of the brain. When we lived in a very predator-rich, we still do today, but in a different form. A predator may be your boss or something, or the loss of a job in your perception. But back, when we're talking about prehistoric times, this was animals or things that could seriously kill you, and we were still figuring out how to navigate the world and become the more dominant species within that. So when that occurred, we had a part of our brain called the amygdala, and it's emotional based, and emotions come in either positive or negative. There is no in between. The amygdala can only fire it's a two-system process, and that's a one system is it's either positive or it's negative. That's it. But the positivity and the negativity that comes within that, give me 2 seconds. What did you just write in the chat? I think
no, I was just letting you know we're getting, again, the clicking still happening. We're going to power through. We're just going to keep going. So if the audience is hearing clicking, it's some sort of feedback we can't really control. So apologize in advance. But
we haven't figured it out. It's an external spiritual source coming to haunt us. But the amygdala is very reactive, and this part of you is fantastic for if a tiger was to come into the room, and it'll stimulate and come very, very quickly, and it'll activate certain things. So it'll toughen up the muscle fibers in order to make sure that you can get hit or scratched or anything like that. It'll pump specific drugs throughout your system to make sure that if you were to get hit, that you'd actually be able to take on that hit and not feel it immediately. That's why if you have a fight with your brother and your sister and you have adrenaline rushing through you, you may not realize that you've been scratched when you're younger. But then an hour or two later, your mom will say you're bleeding on the right arm, and you'll go, "Oh crap! I didn't even feel that until It was afterwards, when you had a chance to relax and the adrenaline left your system. Your pupils will dilate in order to allow you to see more. So it maximizes the human potential to a certain degree in order to allow you within that specific environment. The problem being that that's meant to be a short term thing to get out of a dangerous situation, but it's not a long term thing that you would utilize because it has very extreme impacts on human physiology. If you run that over and over again and a large amount of adrenaline, etc., through the heart, you can end up wearing and tearing down the body. So the amygdala is the lowest processing unit, and all emotions come from the amygdala. Then you also have a high part of the brain called the forebrain, and the forebrain can see pairs of opposites and bring balance together. We call this synthesized emotions. So one of them is imbalanced, polarized emotions, is either positive or negative, and the other one is synthesized emotions, where you can see the positive and the negative equally.
Mhm.
So the forebrain is the more advanced part of the brain that allows you to see both sides and make a rational decision. Because the word rational comes from the word ratio, and ratio of a balance of positive to negative. So you have all the puzzle pieces to make a proper thing, and it balances emotions and normalizes human physiology. So whenever it is that you're experiencing an emotion, it's the amygdala stepping in and doing the thinking for you. And the amygdala is always trying to do two things. It's trying to avoid a predator, pardon me, and seek a prey. It's infatuated with the idea of eating, but then it's also running away from a predator that could eat you. The problem is that our perceptions create predators and preys out of things that are happening within our environment. So if you perceive that you're going to lose your job and you're infatuated with your job, the greater the infatuation for your job, the greater the anxiety that you're going to experience, because it makes the job the prey that you want to consume and eat, and then the predator the loss of the job. But the truth of the matter is that the loss of that particular job has both benefits and drawbacks. I've lost jobs in my life where I thought it was the end of the world. But then after losing that job, I took very different pathways and started to entertain things that were much more inspiring within my life. So the forebrain has an ability to transcend emotions, but whenever you're experiencing emotions, it's because you're polarizing due to that animal instinct to avoid predator and seek prey. And that can happen in a relationship, not wanting your partner to leave because you're infatuated with them and then resenting the idea of them leaving. That can happen within a person in your life that's potentially about to pass away. But it comes with infatuations and resentments that we create within our perceptions. The greater the extremity of between positive and negative, the greater the symptomology that will be necessary within that. In 11 years of working with clients to dissolve grief, I've never had one client that has ever worked on a perceived negative of somebody that they perceived they were grieving. They only ever work on the perceived positives. So we can only ever grieve what we infatuate with, not what we resent. When we perceive the loss of something that we resent, we have relief. When we perceive the gain of something that we resent, we have grief. So people are not understanding that, and instead they're thinking something's happening to them instead of bringing balance to both of those perceptions. And that's what I've been working with clients to do. So it's the amygdala overactivating that's creating symptomology. And you can call it depression, which is something in the past you're depressed about. You can call it anxiety, which is a perception of something in the future that you're fearful of happening, or some infatuation you're scared of losing. You can call it bipolar, which is the inability to think with the forebrain, but thinking extreme negative, then extreme positive, extreme negative, then extreme positive, just addicted to monopolar thinking. But whichever one of these you call it, it's all actually still the same thing for me. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why when a person first meets me, because I assist facilitators and consultants and help them build their businesses. And sometimes when you have somebody that's a fresh out of their field and they'll say, I don't know if I should work with depression or anxiety or anything like that. And I said, you're giving the terminology too much power, because behind the terminology is a root cause. You got to get down to the root cause and have the correct tools for it. I can do sometimes 15 or 20 discovery calls in a week. And in those discovery calls, I'm having conversations with people to find out if we'd be a great match to work together. And let's say 10 people that I speak with initially book that call because they perceive they're experiencing depression. When I have my initial conversation and ask them, what is it that specifically occurred or has occurred within your life that has allowed you to start feeling depressed? Because there would have been a time when you weren't feeling depressed, and then specific events, situations, or things occurred, and you did. Out of that 10, maybe 4 of them are relationship breakups. Maybe 2 of them are some self worth challenges. Maybe one of them is the loss of a family member. So I'm going to find that there are different root causes that created that symptomology to be there. And the minute I have the root causes, that's what I'm working on. So I think sometimes society looks at the broader label, depression, anxiety, etc., but they don't understand that that's what you're experiencing, but the reason you're experiencing it is what actually requires the work.
Wow, a lot there. Love that. Love everything you just said. And it does kind of give a little bit of clarity to kind of what people are kind of going through. So just to summarize a little bit to make sure I have a full understanding, is basically our reptilian animalistic brain has the fight or flight response that we all know. And basically what happens is we're still using this fight or flight response, but no longer in life-threatening situations, whether it's eat or be eaten. It is more so we're using, we've adapted to use this system on daily stressors, and we tend to give these stressors on things that we like a lot more power than they should, and it develops into this chronic issue that we give a lot of power to. Is that kind of a relatively very
100%
rudimentary? Okay, so I
nailed
don't
it.
make sure.
Yeah.
I'm not
By
as
the way,
smart as
anybody,
you, so I was trying to
no,
break it down.
no, I'll try and keep it as simplistic and fun as normal. But by the way, if everybody sees me blowing my nose, I've had a hay fever attack yesterday, so I don't have a cocaine addiction. Let's just get that out of there.
That's what we were thinking too.
I've
I was
just
like, oh, that's...
I just it's been circulating. But no, everything that you said is absolutely correct. And the reason it happens, there's two reasons. One of which is that that part of you, unless you actually train, and this is what I train my clients to do, and my facilitators, my consultants, and everybody I work with, unless you train the higher part of the brain to actually be more active like a muscle, then the lower part of the brain is going to stimulate, and that's going to be activated. It also activates faster because the blood gets there faster. Because under an attack situation, that needs to be activated immediately. It's
quickly.
like an
Yeah.
emergency protocol within that. The problem is that if we train that lower part of the brain to be more active, we end up more polarized. And the more polarized we are, the more polarization we create through the body. So I don't know if I spoke about this last time, but let me explain how an emotion is created and the impact of that, because it'll give you a good indication. So something happens outside of us. Anything could happen. Let's say you and I are both in a room, and let's put an imaginary third person, one of the listeners right now, and something happens. We call that an event, situation, or a thing externally outside of us. Once that happens, all three of us are going to perceive that in a particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And however we see and perceive that is going to be slightly different based on all three of our reactions. And if I wanted to find out how we all seeing and perceiving that, and what specific emotions could we potentially be experiencing and to what degree, I would hand everyone a sheet of paper. And I'd say, can you just fold that sheet of paper in half, write all the perceived negatives on the left-hand side and all the perceived positives of what just happened in front of us. Now, if you hand me back a sheet of paper and it's got 10 positives and 2 negatives, you're seeing things at a 1-to-5 ratio slanted towards the positive. So we can say that the amygdala is active and activating something that's slightly more positive. So if I ask you about it, your physiology, your tonality, everything should match, and your linguistics as well, what you're saying in reference to that. So you may say, yeah, that was very interesting. So everything will correlate to that and be congruent. If I hand that over to one of the listeners and they've got 6 positives and 6 negatives, that's a 1-to-1 ratio. They'll be very calm, very poised, very balanced. They're very rational in their response because they're seeing a ratio of 1-to-1. And once again, the physiology, tonology, psychology, all of that will be aligned with that. If I ask them about that, they may say, "Yeah, that was interesting, yeah," and smile and be very congruent and poised. But what would happen if I had, let's say, 15 negatives and 2 positives? That's a crazy ratio, and I'm seeing that 15 times. It's a lot compared to 2. So I would have a very different response. And you may ask me about it and say, Manuel, what did your numbers show? And I may fidget and look the other way and kind of go, yeah, don't really want to talk about it. And you can see that the behavior and the tonality and the lack of eye contact with you shows a much more irrational behavior, because I'm breaking the ratio of positives to negatives. And the greater the extremity in which I do that, the greater the physiological and psychological disease becomes. The word disease means the body's not at ease. So if I perceive something to an extreme ratio, I'll use myself because it's the most extreme out of them. Now, that's a 15-to-1. So the mind will take that, the central nervous system, as a 15-to-1, and it will pass that information all the way through the body. And that'll go through neurology, pardon me, That'll go down to the cellular level. But one of the areas that passes, which you just spoke about before, is autonomic nervous system, and it'll stimulate the sympathetic and parasympathetic, the fight or flight and rest and relaxation. Well, I've just told the fight or flight to be 15 times more active and stimulate 15 times more chemicals and hormones throughout that. Now, anytime that you do that, that's an extreme. And you're going to have, by the way, the autonomic nervous system is what creates your emotions as well, because the amygdala has sent the feedback to that. But now the autonomic nervous system, because its job is to regulate chemicals and hormones, has to produce those. So it's going to produce an extreme negative response. Every emotion is like a cocktail at a bar. And the extremities or the ratios is how many shots you're having. 2 to 1 means you're just having two more shots to the other one. It's kind of very close to being balanced. But 15 to 2, that's a lot.
Yeah.
You're going to be drunk on whatever emotion you're experiencing.
And the
Anxiety,
body,
depression.
yeah, well,
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but so the body will basically, however you perceive it, will react internally to that perception and then create hormones, whatever the chemical reaction.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of how you get into this cycle of constantly being in this anxiety, this anxious mode, or this depressed mode, or this stress mode, because that's how you see it. But I guess I have a question that I feel like I'm being screamed at to ask is, when so you're 15 to 2 negative to positive, I'm 1 to 1 or a 6 to 6, and someone is more, are we predetermined to see it? How did you get to 15 to 2? Is that a genetic thing? Is that natural? Is that from your experiences? Because I feel like babies probably wouldn't, they'd all probably be pretty positive, I imagine, or at least neutral, versus as we get older. So is it our experiences that shape this? And then I guess, how does that happen? Because we can't just be born with this negative, constant anxiety thing, or can we? Is it genetic?
There's layers to it. We do have an aspect, because people think that babies in the womb, they used to think, science anyway, that they were just blank slates. But they've now discovered that depending on what's happening with the mother, the baby can alter aspects of how the mother feels, because it no longer wants to be there or doesn't like it, or a fight with the father. So it's actually connected with the mother and has some degree of intelligence and perception around what's going on in its external environment, and still has an animal instinct to avoid pain and seek pleasure within that. So it does have a hedonistic aspect within itself. So when it comes in, there is aspects of the genetics that are at play, because the baby is made up of the genetics of the mother and the father. So there are limitations and things that are associated with that, that are getting passed on to the child, because they're made out of the two fabrics within that. So there is an aspect of that. I believe it's called epigenetics. I know an aspect of that subject, but not in depth. I'm studying it at the moment. It's an amazing subject, but I've only just started to touch onto that. But the easier way to answer it is, if you've seen Shrek, there's a moment when Donkey and Shrek are walking, and somewhere in there, I'll probably butcher it, but Donkey says to Shrek, "You're like an onion. You've got layers." And that's what happens to us as human beings as we go through life. We have layers. So we can have a look at, as you're growing up, you're going to have parents and they have a specific ideology. Could be far left, far right, could be Christian, Catholic, Muslim, atheist, whatever it is. So they impose a certain layer onto that. Then you have your own interactions and challenges that occur within your life. So you add another layer. Then you have your friends, society, culture. You can add the religion, travel. You just add all of these different layers, and you're trying to figure out your own layers. But based on what you were saying there, and if something occurred in that room that triggered off a previous trauma for me, that could be adding to my perception of it, because I'm adding another filter on top of that, and it's triggering off something that occurred, and that could take it from maybe 5 to 2 up to a 10 to 2, but then something else triggers off, because we carry emotional baggage, which is imbalanced perceptions of things that occurred within the past, and we store that physiologically until we bring it into balance, and then that's when we let go of it and put it into the superconscious. But most people don't let go of it; they just continue to carry it with them,
and it builds and builds and builds and builds and builds
yeah.
over time. Okay.
So that can definitely be part of it, but we can also create a new association where something happened. It didn't trigger off anything that happened in the past, but I perceived it to be so traumatic within my perception that I created a new one as well, because we can create new emotional baggage pieces that we add to our list.
Do
So
people need do people need it's kind of, it's just almost a little bit of a segue because that makes a lot of sense, but like, so going into this, some people probably have, you know, depression, anxiety. I know I've gone through, I had depression and anxiety. I still have plenty of anxiety, but it's definitely a lot more under control as I've taken up new practices. So you know, I've taken pills and for, you know, I think it was like Zoloft or something, you know, the normal stuff. Do people need, you know, that's kind of the first go-to in at least Western medicine is, oh, you don't feel good, take this pill. Oh, this is good, take this pill. I guess how effective is that kind of medicine? And I know we're getting to, you know, a different scope, but do people need that, or should they kind of explore alternative medicines to kind of get better if they're feeling this way? Because it's a lot of it most likely comes from nurture versus just nature. So I'm just curious as to like what the pill situation is with that.
well, I'll finish off what I was saying before and tie that up nicely with it. So once we get to the autonomic nervous system and it starts regulating the chemicals and hormones and it's doing 15 to 2, so now it's going to create extremities. And every emotion is a chemical formula and compound formula. So if we look at anxiety, it's adrenaline to the heart, for example. 15 times more adrenaline, that's going to cause quite a bit of wear and tear. If you were to drive a car 10 minutes down the road and back and look after it regularly, put fuel in it, make sure that you got it serviced, car would run perfect. Barely running it just enough to keep it maintained. You could sell that in a couple of years and it maintain its value because it hasn't had that much to it, just like a human body. But if you took a car and drove it from one end of America to the other on a regular weekly basis, but barely looked after it, serviced it, or anything, you'd have a very different car that would have a lot of wear and tear in it. Well, every time we have extremities in our perceptions that run through the autonomic nervous system, we create disease, the body's not at ease, and disorder. That's not the way it's meant to run. So it's going to give you two feedback systems. One, psychology, we call that brain noise. It starts to occupy time and space in your mind and you can't get it out. Anything above 5 to 1 will start to create more brain noise. 15 to 2, that's a lot of brain noise. You'll think about it all day. The second one is physiology. You'll experience emotions inside of you. So now, whatever the emotion is, or the couple of emotions, you can go to a bar and have a couple of shots. You can have a beer, then a sangria, and then 3 shots of tequila. Having multiple emotions about an experience or experiences means that you can also do the same thing. Once you start running these extremities, the body's not meant to do that, and it's starting to create a lot of wear and tear. If you've ever seen pictures of people that are meth addicts and you see them at like 20, and then they show a photo of them at 25 and they look about 45, that's because the heart has beat so many times. It's like what it would have done in that period, it's done within
Oh,
three
wow.
years,
Yeah.
that it's actually increased the aging process of that. Because you take any muscle and you give it the amount of repetitions that it would for 10 years in a year, you're going to have specific symptomology and it's going to age. So when that occurs, it occupies time and space in your mind as a feedback to let you know to address it. It
Mhm.
occupies time and space in your body to let you know to address it. So to answer your question, people are going to pills as the first solution. The problem is, for me, and this is what I've seen in practice over 11 years, with my clients that do that, they're putting a band-aid on an arm that's been, sawed off and it's hanging by the ligament. If you take a Panadol for a small headache, it's fine. You'll get rid of the headache, but that's just a little cut and you can put a band-aid on it. But people are trying to put a lot of band-aids on a car crash, and that's not, in my idea, the wisest thing. It should probably be the last thing that a person looks at in many cases, but it's the first thing they look at. And the problem that occurs with that is I'll have clients that are maybe 7 or 8 years into that, and then they'll say to me, I tried just getting off the drug. I said, if you did the research on the chemical compounds that you're putting inside of your body, quite often opioids, these are extreme drugs that you would never take casually on a regular basis because of the extremity and the impact that they'd have on you. But now you've been taking that for maybe 6 or 7 years. You're not just going to stop doing that. It's like it's a chemical compound. It's like coffee. If you and I decided for a laugh, we'd have 12 coffees right now. And then as we got really high and were buzzing, you said, I don't feel like this anymore. You can't just click your fingers and the coffee run stops
Goes
because you
away.
put a
Yeah.
chemical compound in your body and there's a certain ramification of that. And we've got to wait until that withdraws from our body. We may even have withdrawals tomorrow because of the strength of the chemical, depending on how our body takes it. So as a person does that, they have to wean off it. But clients have stopped taking it and then they've realized I had an anxiety and now I've got a drug dependency and an anxiety because as they've tried to get off it, they've crashed and then they've tried to, for a week, maybe not be on it, but then the anxiety's there. And I said, hold on, the anxiety is still underneath. This is just covering it. What the hell am I doing? I'm not here to be a, drug addict or addicted to a pharmaceutical subscription for my rest of my life. So that becomes really interesting. Then there's some of them that just slowly wean off it, realize they've still got the anxiety or depression and go back. So I think in many of those cases, it's masking the situation. I'm yet to find a client that will do the DeMartini method and bring balance to their perceptions around what they're experiencing the symptoms about and then not require their pharmaceuticals. That's just been what's occurred within practice so far. As they've actually worked on it and they've brought homeostasis back to the mind and homeostasis back to the body, and we've done that in the biggest areas and worked way back emotionally. From there, they've worked with their doctors and said, I'm not feeling that same way. And their doctors usually would say, no, keep taking the drugs. And they'll say, well, I'm even going to go to you or another doctor because I'm going to try and wean off this. This is having an impact on my health. I can't just put chemicals in me all of the time. And then those doctors would say, okay, fair enough. Let's slowly take you off. And if you don't have it, then cool, we'll get you off it. But if you do continue to have it, it'd be wise to put it back on there. I agree with that. That's fair enough. But as they've gone off it, they've realized the anxiety is not there. They've actually addressed the root cause and then it's not necessary. So after seeing that in thousands of cases, I realized that we're in the abuse stage of that, but we're not using, we're now abusing, and we're looking and just grabbing the first thing that we can get, but not understanding what the ramifications are. And I've seen them from people being doped out, literally just at their work, doped out, not spaced out, just, for years, erectile dysfunction. So I've got clients that their marriages are starting to get impacted by that because they're no longer intimate with their partners. And that's one of the so-called side effects of the pharmaceuticals. It's not a side effect, it's an effect. To what degree, that's the question. And I don't have an issue with pharmaceuticals. I think they have their place. I just think our society abuses them as this savior to everything. But I don't think that's the case. I think we should be using them much more wisely.
Why would you, is there a reason why we have gone to the place versus using now that we're abusing? Is there a reason, do you think there's a root cause to the reason of why we are starting more so abusing these drugs for these mental disorders or the, the anxiety, depression, all that stuff? Is there a reason why?
A few different reasons. One, we live in a hedonistic society. I don't promote hedonism. If you look at most cultures, most societies, go speak to most of your friends, they will all say to you, the purpose of life is to be happy, get married and be happily ever after. This promotion of happiness. I don't believe in happiness. I don't teach about happiness. I teach about love. Love is a synthesized balance of both positives and negatives in the teachings that I do. Whereas happiness is the exaggeration of the positive and the minimization or the loss of the negative. I believe it was the Buddha that said that the main cause of human suffering is trying to get that which is unobtainable, all happiness and no sadness, or any, all wellness and no disease, and trying to maintain that. No interest in that. No interest at all. I want to find the balance of the two. I said before that the amygdala is addicted to finding a positive and avoiding a negative. And the more you're addicted to the positive or the peace or the happiness, the more you find the war. So because we're addicted to trying to seek a pleasure and avoid a pain, we're constantly doing things within our lives to do that. We look for a partner that seems to be more positive than negative. It isn't. Get married. You'll find that the partner has things that you call label as positives and negatives, because when they align with your values, you call it positive. When you align with their values, they call you positive. When you go against them, they call you negative, and vice versa. But you're meant to do that because a relationship is a pair of opposites that combine and equal a whole, that have strengths and weaknesses and different sets of values that they prefer to manage, just like a perfectly equilibrated team. So I'm trying to synthesize the pairs of opposites with my clients and take their happinesses and show them the sadnesses, and take their sadnesses and show them the happiness in it. And then they become resilience, because resilience can only occur at the border of support and challenge. Now that they're resilient to both of those, they evolve. That's what human evolution is. The more areas that we can evolve and transcend our emotional and our amygdala and bring balance to, that's when we start to control our emotions instead of our emotions controlling us.
I love that. Back to the root cause kind of aspect of it. So in your experience, in your coaching, teachings of all this, is there any specific reason, someone has, or that you've heard, okay, they they go through anxiety or depression or stress. Then we use those three. And there's like usually like a root cause that's pretty obvious for most people have a specific root cause, whether it was bullying, whether it was just bad family home. Like, is there any like a general thing that people
No,
have? No, it's all different.
no. I mean, the only thing I can say that is a generalization is the fact that the amygdala is trying to avoid a predator and seek a prey. That's the only part that they all have in common. But beyond that, I have a form that my clients fill out. So when I first started working with clients 11 years ago, I'd have an initial conversation. And in that initial discovery call, we'd talk about what they're experiencing, where they are right now. I'd explain how they got there, what emotions are, like I mentioned before, why it's occupying time and space in their mind and their body, and then how they could transition out of that and to create balance. And they would, let's say on the phone, because it's only a 20-minute, sometimes an hour conversation, they'd mention it's my dad, I'm having volatile emotions towards my father. But as I got into the consultation and I'm trying to help them break through what's happening with their father, all of a sudden an ex-girlfriend keeps popping up. And I'm thinking, why is my session being hijacked? I never heard about an ex-girlfriend before. And it was after about 50 clients that I realized, hold on a second, I don't have all the puzzle pieces here. So one in every 20 clients will tell me what they consciously think it is, but they have an unconscious thing that's actually driving a much more charged part of their life. And if we look at the human mind as a hard drive, if you imagine, say, I've got a Mac computer right in front of me, and if I wanted to check what was on the hard drive, I'd go top, click on the little Apple icon, and I forgot what you press, but then it shows me a bar graph, and that bar graph will have 40% photos, 20% images, whatever, and then it folders, etc. The human mind works exactly the same way, I found. So you may have 60% of what you're holding on to is an ex-partner, 30% is some self-worth stuff, 20%. And when we get down to the end, we'll find out how much presence you actually have because of all of the unconscious programs or conscious programs that are running within there. So if you've got a 40% charge towards your mum, but you've only got 10% presence, and we let go of the 40% and we add that to the 10, now we got 50. You're now 50% more present. But if the next one was a 20% of self-worth, and we knock that out of the park, now you've got 70% presence and only 30% of things that are occupying time and space in your mind and creating brain noise. So I created a form that goes through every decade of a person's life, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30. Obviously, if somebody comes in and they're 35, etc., goes through all the way up to 100, they would only stop at 35. But we evaluate every single specific charge that they have, whether extreme positive or negative, which is creating symptomological challenges for them. Then we get clear on the hierarchy from highest to least, which gives me an indication of that bar with the hard drive. And then we work on the highest charge and work our way backwards. I never work on small and work up. I always work on the big and work my way down within that. But the bigger the challenge that we work on, the greater the change that the person will be able to experience physiologically and psychologically. So I'll give you a great example of that. I had a lady that came to me and she said, I'm addicted to smoking weed. I said, you're not addicted to smoking weed. I've never met a drug addict before. And I've worked with plenty that told me that they were. And she said, what do you mean? I said, you've got a weed solving solution. She goes, what does that mean? And I said, well, whenever you when you have a lot of emotional challenges that occur, you go to weed as a way to solve it because weed kicks in
Comfort.
immediately. Smoked a bit of weed in my teens from 15 to about 26. Smoked a little bit here and there, and it happens within a couple of seconds of smoking weed. So she kind of laughed. She goes, well, that's true. And I said, well, do you smoke weed at work? She goes, oh, hell no, I'm a professional. And I said, well, you can't have that much of an addiction because clearly you understand exactly when to do it and not to do it. It hasn't taken over your life. I said, so at work, you're not smoking it. What do you do after work? She goes, take a bus home. Do you smoke it there? No, I don't smoke in the bus. I'm a regular person. In Australia, in America, it's a little more normal. I smell weed in like New York on the streets and stuff. But in Australia, it's kind of weird during the day. You'd smell it later on at night when people are partying or something, but not during the day. And then I said, when do you do it? She goes, when I get home to my apartment, I live by myself. And then everything, and she just clicked to it. She says, when all the emotions come to my mind, because I can avoid them at work and pretend they're not there and get busy. And I can avoid them while I'm getting home and I'm surrounded by people. But the minute I'm by myself and left with my thoughts, all of a sudden, all of the emotions come in. And I said, so can you see you using that as a strategy? She said, yes. I said, what previous strategies have you utilized? She goes, oh, I tried a psychologist, didn't work. Tried a psychiatrist. They just tried to give me drugs. I didn't like the drugs. I preferred my own drugs. Said, tried talking to friends. That didn't work. I said, so all of these things were long-term things that weren't producing a result. But what happens when you smoke a joint? She goes, immediate gratification. And I said, okay, so you found a solution that is a band-aid, but it's working for you. She goes, yes. I said, so let's get clear on what the emotions are that are popping up and who the reference is, the root cause, and let's work on that. So I told her, I said, we'll worry about the marijuana thing later. The other thing about me is I'm not too fussed about people smoking marijuana. That's been culturally around for a long period, and in Australia, certain aspects of legalization. In America, you can see places where it's very heavily legalized, even in Thailand now. So they're just realizing that it's just like alcohol and everything else. It's not the drug, it's the use and the abuse of it within that. So if a person smokes one joint once a year and somebody else drinks every single weekend, I'd much rather hang out with the person that smokes a joint once a year. They're using instead of abusing within that. But her and I found out that it was her father that was a major emotional challenge, and things were happening around her that were triggering her and reminding her of that. So we worked on that. Then once we finished working on it, it was about 3 weeks. It took us 4 weeks to have that fully done and balance every emotion around that permanently. But 3 weeks into it, I get a text message from her, and the text message says, "I haven't smoked any weed for about 2 days." I said,
Wow.
"Great." She just messaged back. She goes, "You already kind of knew that was going to happen, didn't you?" And I said, "Yep." I go, "Why don't you give me a call? Let me, share your victory with me, share one of your wins." She goes, 2 days ago, I got home and I remember having a great session with you earlier on in the week, and it really broken through some of the major stuff around my dad that had been triggering off a lot of things in my environment. And once that was done, I got home, I set up a nice bath and a shower, and she goes, "I usually get straight in the door and I straight away have some weed." She goes, "I'm so organized. Sometimes I pre-roll a few joints, so I'm organized for the week." But she goes, "It probably wasn't until 3 or 4 hours later that I poured myself a glass of wine," and I went, "Oh my goodness, I haven't smoked any weed." Then she went, "I should quickly go smoke some." And then she stopped for a second and said, "But do I need to?" And as she tried to bring up the emotions that we'd balanced and cleared because we'd hit the jackpot of what was really causing this thing for her, she goes, "No, I don't need to." She goes, "Do I want to?" And she goes, "Not right now, because I'm needed to do this. And now I have a chance not to and have a clear mind. I'm going to enjoy this and a glass of wine." So she watched a movie and enjoyed the rest of her evening. And then the next day she got up and she felt phenomenal because she didn't have to recover from any kind of wine and weed. It was just,
I
a
mean, that's
glass of
incredible.
wine, just a nice healthy red. So the next day when she woke up, came back home, same thing again, got through the door, opened it, kind of weird, and went, "You're great. Not going to do it again." And that's when she messaged me. So she didn't smoke for months. The next time she smoked was her social occasion out with friends, and they offered her one, and she had it socially with them, and then that was it. Didn't smoke it again after that. So it became something that was more like a glass of red wine to have with friends, maybe once or twice a year. But it wasn't the problem. It was a solution for her. And the minute we gave her a much more powerful solution and taught her how to actually dissolve her own challenges and emotional problems, then she didn't need to use that.
Gosh, I mean, that's so powerful. Just uh like just using other strategies to get, I mean, like it's amazing how someone thought they were an addict, and then it's like you're not actually an addict, and even regardless of the drug or the situation, so you're using this as a coping mechanism slash strategy for something else that's going on, and then getting to the root cause of that can basically stop that, obviously depending on the specific situation. I want to be
Well, look at the
mindful.
movies.
Oh
Let me
yeah.
quickly say, look at the movies. What happens in the movies the minute somebody has an emotional thing? They're at the bar by themselves,
Yeah.
half drunk, ordering another drink. I've never understood that. I drank to either have a glass of wine because I loved wine when I was younger. I don't drink alcohol these days, but I drank to do that, or I drank to pick up women because that's where the women were,
Oh my
and
god.
nightclubs. If I wasn't doing either of those, I didn't have a desire to manage my emotions for alcohol because I figured that if I was already having an emotional challenge, why would I want to be drunk and have a hangover and deal with two things when I would
Mm.
be wiser to just deal with one? But
Well, and it's a
that was just my
depressant too.
approach.
And and
Yes.
alcohol is a depressant too. So you're even more depressed the next day if you were, from that night. So it's even worse. It's like double
Yeah.
the effect. Real quickly, are there any, so let's say someone's listening to this right now, they have depression or they're going through depression, they have anxiety, something that's in their life, they have these undiscovered root causes. Are there any actions they could take on their own to at least maybe identify a potential root cause that you found, like one or two tricks that someone could go try this and it might help alleviate some of that for you?
Yeah. I'll give you a basic rundown, but I don't think they're really tricks. within that. I have a form that I give my clients to fill out, but I've had clients that filled out my advanced discovery form and said to me, "Why have I never done this before?" And basically, what the form does is that goes through, like I said, every decade of their
Yeah.
life and gets them to extract all the perceived positives and negatives. And then from there, have a look at all of those and then say, what's the hierarchy? Like, what's the number one thing that if I could magically click my fingers and that were to disappear, would create the greatest amount of, or restore the greatest amount of order and organization in my mind, in my life, because that had been resolved, or if it wasn't there, or it didn't occur. So I'd say number one, just put it all down on a sheet of paper, just 0 to 10 for all the decades, and then get clear on what it is that you're carrying with you in terms of emotional baggage. The next step from that, in terms of doing work, usually I'd recommend that somebody sees somebody like me and utilizes the Demartini method, because that's the most powerful tool that I've been able to utilize that I can guarantee results in emotionally. But if they wanted to just get an insight as to what that's about, they could download The Breakthrough Experience by Dr. John Demartini, which is a phenomenal book. Then that book gives you a profound understanding of not only the methodology and how you can create change, but gives a few pretty cool exercises in there to help you learn how to manage and balance your own perceptions. That if you play 100% with it, you can actually create some change by reading the book. Another great book is The Values Factor by Dr. John Demartini. Every human being has a unique set of values. I'm not talking about honor and integrity. They're symptoms of when you're in alignment with your values. But it has a test in there, because I found that there's two things that really create a large amount of emotional turmoil in terms of feedback. Number one, if you're not doing what you love and loving what you do. So my highest values is human evolution, development, and growth. That's why I can have a conversation with you for hours. I can explain things that might sound very sophisticated, because I'm talking about an area that I value. And anytime that you do something that you love and love what you do, 5 hours feels like 5 minutes. You're organized, disciplined, reliable, and focused spontaneously without being asked. Nobody has to tell me to work 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. That's easy. I'm a kid in the candy store doing it. You have information retention order. You remember everything that you actually study, because they're things that are valuable to you, and the mind works on a values basis where it neurologically myelinates things that are aligned with what's most valuable to you. But if you're not doing something you love, you procrastinate, hesitate, frustrate, and you have attention deficit disorder. My fiance loves flowers, is obsessed with them, plants them all in the front yard, tells me about them all the time, and I forget everything that she says seconds after or at the same time she's saying it. Because anything that's lowering your values, your mind takes that information and actually breaks the neurological connections to them, because it's trying to work on greatest efficiency within that. 5 minutes will feel like 5 hours in an area that you dislike and despise. So if you get clear on what's most meaningful, valuable, and inspiring to you, you can maximize human potential, because you're stacking the odds within your favor. And then you can do something that you love with your life. That's one of the things. But the second thing is obviously to dissolve the emotions that you're carrying with you that are preventing you from being able to operate on a second and minute to minute basis at your highest potential. But if you do those two things, which those two books have, and give you an indication into, they're a fantastic doorway at a very cheap entry point to understanding true physiological and psychological change. My thing has always been about results. I don't care about my qualifications. I've got over $300,000 worth of my own personal money in a study for human evolution, development, growth, and qualifications. But anything that didn't work, or only 10% of it worked, I just left it behind. I said, that's great. But if I see 100 clients and I'm only producing 10% of a result utilizing that, then my tools aren't powerful enough. It's not them, it's me. So I'd continue to study and look for the next methodology and the next one and the next one. What I've just recommended there is through the Demartini Institute, which he's from Houston, Texas, originally, but he's the world's leading human behavioral specialist and Guinness Book record holder for most books read by any human being. So I would rather study through him, because he's done the comparative studies and then found the synthesis between them. And he's teaching on physiology, psychology, biology, astronomy. There's a range of subjects you can learn, but they've all been synthesized. So that's what those books will give you an insight into.
I love it. Where can people find you and more of your work?
So you can head to www.emmanuelanthony.com.au. So that's where my website is. You can add me on social media. So Instagram, Emmanuel_Anthony. You can also book in for a complimentary 20-minute discovery call, no matter where you are around the world, as long as you speak English, then we can communicate. But I'll leave that with you, I believe, in the notes that I sent you for the show notes. You can put them in there for a discovery call. And you can add me on Facebook, Emmanuel H. Anthony, as well. I try and produce some inspiring and fulfilling video and real content, as well as text on a weekly basis that attack and address different common challenges that people are facing in a different perspective on how you can overcome those.
I love it. And yeah, so everything that there he just said will be in the show notes. So you can click on that. I highly recommend going to it. If you do have anything, extra stress, extra anxiety, depression, anything like that, look, if you got to try something, this could be a great way to kind of bounce out of it and really change the trajectory of your day-to-day, change the trajectory of your life. If you're really struggling through this, don't look up quantum equilibrium. Obviously look up Emmanuel in the show notes. And any final
That's because,
thoughts?
by the way, that's just because our website's being redone. We're rehashing that, so that will be available later on in 2023. I'm meeting again with the designers this week as we're trying to get the exact look that we wanted. I'm a bit of a perfectionism when it comes to design. I used to be a designer, and how I wanted that to come out, because it's we're hiring so many staff members lately that I really wanted it to reflect where the company is going. So we rebranded, but that will be out. Yeah.
Well, it was more people watching the name as Quantum Equilibrium. So like, wait, I'm looking this up. I can't find it, but yeah. So it's I like that. I didn't know the website was under development, so that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with before we come off here?
Yeah, definitely would. I'm a lot of you may not know this, but I'm Mauritian, which is a very tiny little island. Used to be all Rodrigues, which is actually next to Mauritius. I always say Mauritius because most people don't even know where Mauritius is, but more people know where Mauritius than Rodrigues is, because it's like putting a pen on a piece of paper and putting a dot. That's what it looks like on a map.
Oh gosh.
But it's that tiny. But I came from a third world country and came to Australia. I didn't know how to speak English. And my desire to understand human evolution and human behavior was based around the fact that when I felt that my voice was muted, which is, the reason why I speak today, because I wanted to really learn how to speak and communicate, I became obsessed with studying other people and how they spoke and communicate. I didn't know that at that time I'd be blessed to understand and discover things about this world and human physiology that could help human beings on a daily basis create changes within minutes and hours that they've been trying to do for decades or years. I've seen depression in 3 hours be lifted that a person had for 10 years and never come back. So I'm inspired to help people create change. And my journey of doing that within myself has led me to be able to do that with thousands of people. So if you've got something in your life that you're having trouble overcoming and it's preventing you from living your most fulfilling, inspiring, and grateful life, I would love to be a part of your change. It's not only something that I love, it's something I work 12 hours a day, Monday to Friday, and study religiously. And it's the most beautiful thing that I could do. I can't imagine doing anything else in my life. So if we happen to get in contact and I happen to create a change within your life that creates a ripple effect for other people that you care about, because quite often if I work with one, I get this amazing ability to work with groups of people. This usually brings me to tears of gratitude when I speak about this, so pardon me. But I want to say thank you to everybody I get a chance to work with. For all of you that listen to this podcast, re-listen to it again. I'm sure that there are nuggets of wisdom that we've shared here that if you were to understand it and apply it, I guarantee you would create change in your life. But know that the symptoms that you're experiencing are not you and your personality. They're an experience that you're having based on your perception, and you can learn how to alter your perception, create change. You deserve to do that. So that's what I love to share.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.